As a school administrator, you just don't participate in IEP meetings. You set the tone, guide the process, and you ultimately shape the outcome. Your words carry authority. They influence how decisions are made, how families feel, and whether the process is perceived as collaborative or predetermined. And in many cases, your language could have legal implications. In today's video, I'm going to walk through 10 statements that never should be said in an IEP meeting by an administrator. Not because administrators lack care or professionalism. I should know, I was one. But because these statements often reflect system pressure, time, staffing, resources, and that can unintentionally shift that focus away from the student. It could create procedural or compliance concerns, and it could ultimately weaken trust with the families. This is not about fault. This is about refinement of our practices. Because strong IEP leadership requires more than compliance. It requires clarity. It requires intentional language. And it requires a consistent commitment to student-centered decision making. So let's take a look at the first one. The number one thing that as an administrator you should not say in an IEP meeting is, "We don't offer that service here." That statement reframes the conversation around program limitations instead of a student's need. And remember, under IDEA, services are determined by what the student needs to access a free and appropriate public education, not what is currently available on a campus or within the current staffing model. And if you do bring that up, you're at risk of being interpreted as saying that that's a denial of services based on availability, which is not legally defensible. Some stronger leadership language that you could use are, let's determine what the student needs and then identify how we can provide that. Number 2, never say, "We've never done that before." This can unintentionally shut down innovation and individualized problem solving. And IEP teams are expected to consider unique needs, to explore new and different supports, and to respond flexibly. The risk of saying that is it signals rigidity rather than individualized decision making. So instead, you might want to say, let's examine whether this is appropriate based on the student's data and their current needs. Number 3, never say, "That's not in our budget." Budget is a systems issue, not an IEP team consideration. And that statement is directly in violation of a free and appropriate public education because services cannot be denied based on cost. Instead, you could say, let's identify the student's needs first and then determine how we will provide those supports. Number 4, don't say, "All students with this disability go to this placement." That is a hallmark of predetermination. IEPs are individualized by law, and placement must be based on data, goals, and services, not a disability category. You are in the risk of violating procedural safeguards, and you can invalidate decisions. Instead, you could say, "Let's review the full continuum of services and determine which is appropriate for this student." Number 5, don't say, "We can't put that in the IEP." If a support is necessary for the student to access their education, then it belongs in the IEP. That could include things such as behavior supports or implementation details or staff responsibilities. Limiting what is documented in an IEP can result in a lack of implementation and accountability. So instead, you might want to say, let's determine whether this support is necessary for access and document it appropriately. Number 6, never say, "Let's just wait and see." While caution can be appropriate, delay can also mean missed intervention opportunities, and IEPs are designed to be proactive, not reactive. The risk of this is to failure of acting on data, and that might result in a lack of progress or a denial of timely support. So instead, let's say, let's review current data and determine if intervention is warranted at this time. Number 7, don't say they're doing fine. Fine is not a measurable outcome. Students may be appearing successful while at the same time not meeting their IEP goals, relying heavily on supports and accommodations, which might be masking the difficulties they actually have. And you're at risk of minimizing the need and can be delaying necessary adjustments that the student may actually need to progress. So instead, let's look at the progress monitoring data that we have and evaluate goal attainment before we make our decision. Number 8, we don't have a staff for that. Never say this, and why this matters, because staffing challenges are real, but they do not eliminate responsibility. When you make that statement, you are at risk of using a system limitation over a student's need, and that can erode trust quickly. So instead, let's problem solve this, how we can ensure that this service is delivered effectively. Number 9, don't say that's a medical issue and not an educational issue. That creates false separation, and there are some instances where the student has a condition that impacts their access, their participation, and their performance, and that is relevant to the IEP. The risk of saying it's only a medical issue overlooks critical supports tied to learning. So instead, you may want to say, let's examine how this impacts the student's educational performance and access. That shows you are taking into consideration the items that the parent has presented to you. And finally, don't say, sign this today and we can move forward. Families have the right to review, to process, and to ask questions. And if you try to force someone to sign during a meeting, you are putting some perceived pressure on that individual, which could undermine trust, and it could also raise procedural concerns. Instead, you may want to say, please take the time you need. We're available to answer any questions as you review the document. As an administrator, your role in an IEP meeting is just not procedural. It is instructional leadership in action. You are modeling how decisions are made, how teams collaborate, and how students are prioritized. When your language is precise, it's student-centered, and it's grounded in data and law, you create meetings that are not only compliant, but credible, respectful, and creative. So before your next IEP meeting, pause and ask yourself, are my words reflecting system limitations or student needs? Because the most effective administrators don't just manage the process, they lead with intention. If this video was helpful for you, consider sharing it with your leadership team or your campus staff. And if you're committed to strengthening your IEP practices and compliance, subscribe to my channel for more content which is focused on special education leadership, decision making, and real-world application.